Welcome to Watercolor and Wonder. Today we're continuing our nature study series on invertebrates, following Ambleside Online's nature study schedule. Today's topic is earthworms, so something that we probably think we're pretty familiar with, but there's always something more to learn, especially when we look closely. So the video today is just going to be a real-time painting of an earthworm so that you can begin to match your colors and textures and shapes if you're struggling with your art techniques in your nature journaling. So grab your gear and let's get going. Okay, so today we're sketching our earthworm first, and then we'll mix up the colors, and then we'll paint the first layer, and then finally come back in and add the texture and the shadow. So let's get sketching. You can see from my reference photo, I am going to be, of course, painting this larger than life scale, so that we can get a real good look at the details of our worm. Feel free to subscribe and like if you are going to be doing more of this nature journaling and want to follow along with me. One of the things I think about as I'm drawing whatever it is I'm drawing is I'm looking at both the shape of the thing and the shape of outside the thing. So I see this shape right here. I didn't quite get it that first time, so I'm going to come back in and I'm looking more at the negative space than the worm itself. That helps with a lot of things. If you just feel like something is off, you can't quite figure out what, you feel like you're drawing what you're seeing, sometimes look at the shape outside of it. And I'm going to do the same thing here for this loop. I'm going to draw the shape of the loop that I'm seeing first, and then fill in the worm itself. You can see pretty quickly then we have nailed our shape down. And that looks a lot like, this will be a faster drawing today since the curves are, and of course your worms will be in different. I'm just going to go to trace back over there so you can see a little more clearly what I've drawn, and I'm going to clean up that. Again, just a plain pencil. You can use art pencils, but don't feel like you have to have all the special equipment to begin, all the special gear. And I can see this shape is even a little more narrow than what I initially gave it. I'm also looking at where this point is pointing and make sure I'm matching that angle. And just coming back around and making sure that the width of it all lines up. All right. Fix that one last time. Okay, so there we have our sketch. Now I'm using my smaller water brush today because we're just dealing with a smaller subject. And I've got a bunch of eraser in there already. So the colors I'm seeing today are a neutral tone that has some brown in it. So I'm going to take my neutral tint or black, and I'm going to add some brown. And when we water that down, we'll get this grayish shade that matches our worm. And I also have some pinks, but I'm gonna dull them. I've got this maroon shade here. There's a tiny bit of it that's this bright, but most of it is going to be duller. So I'm gonna add a little bit of brown to darken it. And you can add, if you follow my other videos, you can add green to make anything less bright. Or like you add the opposite color on the color wheel to make any color less bright. The opposite of magenta on the color wheel will be green. And I way overdid it there. I'm just gonna, sometimes it just takes a few times. I'm just glancing at my photo as I'm going. I see definitely some of this shade, almost like a flesh tone. Be a little more gentle with my magenta. I'm gonna come back to this. I think I'm just gonna keep that, and then I'm also going to add a dark brown and then a dark gray for some shadows to have ready. Okay, these are all the colors I'm seeing today. So we've got some tones of brown and gray, and we've got some tones of pink, like a very, very dull, plummy, mauvey pink. And I'm gonna go ahead and start with this color. That's our main body. And I'm gonna add a wash, which just means a solid coat, starting almost at the tip, because my tip on each end, we're gonna pull that pink in. And just painting a smooth coat, and we're gonna let that dry. And we'll add in our shadows and our texture. So pretty straightforward today. This is a great one if you are still feeling a little rocky about your nature journaling. It's a really good one to practice with because you can. It's not an intimidating subject. It's hard to mess up the shape of it since there are so many forms our earthworms take. And I'm going to pull this color all the way to about here. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to come back. I'm going to pick up a little bit of this while this end is still a little wet, and I'm going to gently touch it, and that way this will blend as it dries. And I'm going to pull my lighter shade here. I'm going to start here and work back in a minute. I don't want to lose all of this color by touching that gray too soon. And as we get to the end, you can see it gets darker. So I'm going to pull my darker color in. By doing this all quickly and while it's wet, it'll allow the colors to blend more seamlessly. And I'm just going to pull this very gently over. I don't want it to invade and blend and lose all of this as it dries. I'm going to keep wiping my colors off in between, and I'm going to add a little bit too much water there. That will push. When I added water just now by accident, that water will push the colors of my paint places I don't want it to go, which means I might just come back later. All right, so we're going to pause here, let it dry. Okay, so now our first layer is completely dry, and I have erased my pencil marks just so you can see more clearly. If you're going to erase your pencil marks before you're done painting, just make sure it's every bit dry, because you do not want to rip your painting, which is exactly what will happen if it's still a little damp. All right, so to coat 2, I'm going to add in some shadows and just darken the edges. Because our worm is a cylinder, essentially, the edges are going to be darker. So I'm going to take that same shade, I'm going to go back in down each side, and this will give our worm shape. The way you're going to soften this so it's not just 2 stripes down the back is, I'm going to go about halfway here. Now I'm going to wipe off my brush so all the color's out. I'm going to make a little bit of squeeze so it's a little wet, and I'm going to touch the wet brush to the inside, and that will allow the color to bleed softly toward the center. But because I'm not adding more color, it's just going to soften the edge. That will keep our crisp outside edge, soften our inside edge, and we're going to do the same thing on the other half of our worm. So just trace the edges around with another coat of the same color that you put down first. You can stop a little bit. I'm going to wipe the color off, take just water, soften the edge so it blends toward the middle, and that will give our worm our rounded shape. And then we'll finish up the last bit here with some more of that color. Soften it toward the center. And then we'll do the same on the ends with the other color. You can see this side of my worm is going to be darker, so I'm going to put a little bit more down on this side. I'm going to soften it toward the center after I've removed the color. You can even pull it up. I'm going to use my lighter color on this side. So it's just not as, the light source was from that direction. So I'm just going to indicate that. Same for down here. This side is going to be darker. I'm going to soften it. And then I'm going to go back, and this edge along here is also darker. So I'm going to just mix a little bit more of this with black and brown, trying to match that with a little more brown tone of my worm. And I just want to make this edge even darker to indicate, that way it will indicate which side the light is from. And I went a little bit out of the line, so I'm just going to dab that up. I have a little bit of paper towel on hand for just such occasions. I'm just glancing at my photo as I'm doing this to check to see where are the darkest spots, and that's where I'm going over again. And blend it into the center. And I'm going to go down to this side and do the same. Still a little wet down here, so I don't actually have to add water. I'm just going to let the paint do its thing on its own. The wonders of watercolor. Come back along here. And then pull that down, and then down here. And here I see I have a little bit darker spot. And we've about finished up our shadows now. I'm going to come back to the end. And we're going to add in our details, which is, I can see down the center of my worm, you can see the dirt moving through its digestion, so we're going to add that in. Just continuing to soften any sharp edges that develop. There we go. So you can just drag your brush along anywhere that it's going you don't want it to go and pull it where you want it. I like what it's doing right now. I'm going to leave that as is. We're going to let it dry a second time now. So this is the second time we're drying. We've added in our first coat, and now we've added in our shadows. Okay, now we're beginning our third and final coat. And so that is going to be our details. On mine, I can see, especially right through here, a little bit of the line. So I'm going to get some gray, and I'm just going to add this little digestive squiggle coming through here, and it kind of fades out and fades in, and I see a little bit down here. Just some, I'm just going to add some darker spots as I'm following this very interesting thing along. And I see a little bit darker over here, and I don't kind of lose it in here. Alright, then the last thing we're going to do, two things more. We're going to add the highlights, which I have some white gouache. You want to use this in like a toothpaste consistency is what you're looking for. You do not want this runny like your watercolor. It will just dry transparent and defeat what you're trying to do. So I'm going to go in now with a little bit of this, and I'm trying to wipe off all the extra water and just get the gouache. And again, this is another reason I'm using my smallest brush today. So I'm adding, see how we have these two white lines kind of down the back. They're not steady though, they kind of have breaks through it. There's parts that are steady, but this is what gives the sheen, knowing that this creature is not dry. So we don't want just a straight line. I'm going to go back and get a little more and do the second line. Kind of dots out just a few spots in here. We'll pick it back up over here. And then this one becomes the dominant line on the second half, where we do have most of it intact. Till about here. Then we lose it, we're going to go back and add a little bit of the second line here. And finally on the tail, or the end, I don't know if we can call it a tail. And then last thing I'm going to do to show that this, the shape of it, is I'm going to add a few of these curved lines. They're kind of like whatever shape you want to show it. It's like a stretched out C. Parts we're looking straight down on will just be straight across. And I'm not adding every line, but the ones that are the most prominent. And this will just indicate the shape. And as we come along here, you can even pull through those lines that we already made. And this is what's really going to make this look like what you actually observe, right? It's all that, those little details. Follow up down here, all the way to the tip. There's a few lines coming through here. That are more pronounced. Now, when we finish this, the other thing I really noticed is I want to add in that on the end of my worm, it's not completely smooth, but it's kind of a bumpy shape. So I'm just going to add in a couple of those bumps. And the same with down here, just a little, again, we're just suggesting the shape that's really there, right? Pick a little bit of that back up. If you add too much, create a thirsty brush by washing it out and just touch it back on there. I'm going to do that here. It's kind of like a vacuum cleaner, picks it right up. And then any of those lines we lost, just add them in here. And then finally I'm going to add in a shadow. Actually, as I'm looking at this, I don't think I got some of my shadows on the actual body as dark as they should be. So just tracing that color over it again can re-emphasize that. Nothing is permanent with watercolor, so don't feel like once you've done it, you can't add it. No. Now the last thing I'm going to do is add the shadows around it, just to show that it is sitting on a space. can touch that line with some water. Bring it in. I've got a shadow right here. Soften it. As you'd like. This is why I wasn't super concerned with those edges, but knowing that I was going to add this shadow in, and it would just become part of those. So there we go. Pull that around. Shadow got a little smaller there. Fade it out. And an overhead source of light, so there's a little bit of shadow all around it. You look at your light source and then just add the appropriate shadows for that. And again, I'll soften this with some water. Pulling it out. Just go back in anywhere it didn't quite get dark enough, and you can adjust, and now you have documented your earthworm. Congratulations. Thanks for joining me today. Look forward to painting again with you next time on Watercolor and Wonder.